President Cyril Ramaphosa reportedly considering appointing an Afrikaner as the new South African ambassador to the United States of America. The USA last month expelled South Africa's ambassador Ebrahim Rasool over remarks that he had made about the Trump administration. Relations between the USA and South Africa are at an all-time low. US President Donald Trump has accused the South African government of persecuting white Afrikaners. In another matter, the National Treasury and the South African Revenue Service, they're reportedly close to a solution for the widely rejected VAT hike scheduled to come into effect from the 1st of May. So we are going to be joined virtually now by a senior research fellow at the Trade Collective, Dr. Lebohang Pheko, and a professor of practice, School of Governance at the University of Witwatersrand, of course also founder of Democracy Works Foundation, Professor William Gumede. Good morning to the both of you. Thank you for making time to be part of this pertinent chat today here on Morning Live.
Thank you so much.
Good morning. Yeah.
All right, good morning. Dr. Pheko, I want to start with you, and then Prof. William will bring you into the conversation. We're obviously just looking at headlines that we saw on various newspaper fronts, making its way into our headlines today. Reports of President Ramaphosa now said to be considering a list of 4 white Afrikaners as the new U.S. ambassador. What's your take, given the dynamics unfolding?
Well, I mean, I suppose it's a bit disappointing, but there are a few things we should always think about when we consider our international relations. First, what are our own personal national economic interests? Secondly, what is the affinity between ourselves, the candidate, and the sending nation? And thirdly, how do we repair and strengthen political trust? We should also bear in mind that we are also privy to things like the Vienna Protocol, and that speaks to the notion of non-interference. It also speaks to the notion of sovereignty of states. It also speaks to the notion of peaceful settlement of disputes. And we've seen over the last few weeks that the Trump administration doesn't seem to have been particularly interested in recognizing any of these. And in fact, we had issues with the previous American envoy or ambassador who was sent to South Africa, who made some really spurious accusations, as it were, around South Africa's defense and so forth, which turned out to be completely untrue, of course. Of course, he was demarched, but that doesn't mean to say that the damage wasn't done. And yet our energy and our response was entirely different to what we've been experiencing with this new U.S. administration. And I do also think, of course, that as many people have said, that we should be very mindful not to feed into the idea that this Afrikaner victimhood narrative has been given any credence. And as the representative of South Africa and the South African embassy or envoy or diplomatic missions abroad is a representative of our interests, is a representative of who we are, not only a majority African country, but of course one that has its own power, one that has its own identity, and one that has to be seen to be asserting ourselves as all nations must. And so the United States in this instance seems to be viewing itself, its sovereignty, as sovereign amongst all other nations, which flies in the face of this Vienna Protocol.
Thank you for those opening remarks, Dr. Gumede. I mean, sorry, Dr. Pheko, because Dr. Gumede, obviously political economy matters really taking center stage. How would you like to weigh following Dr. Pheko?
Now, good morning and good morning to the viewers, and I wish you everyone had a blessed Easter weekend.
Thank you.
This is our most important trading relations, and I know by volume, China is our biggest trading partner. But the US, if we put it all together, if we include our trade with them, if we include our development aid, our exchanges with them, their support for us, then they become our biggest partner. And also the US is the world's biggest consumer market. And if we get this wrong, if we can't resolve this conflict, it will be the biggest shock to South Africa's economy since 1994. And I think all South Africans must understand this very, very important thing. We're talking here of upwards to 800,000 jobs that may be in jeopardy if we don't find an appropriate compromise. Secondly, it is, this crisis has been self-inflicted, and we mustn't blame or victim or or try to be victims and blame, for example, Afrikaners or Afroforum. When the ANC was the majority government, the ANC took an approach which was perceived to be anti-American, in fact, hostile to the US. And it was always going to come to this. Even if the Democrats would have been in power, they would have eventually responded um, to South Africa. Now, how do we get out of here? It's clearly for the Trump, the ANC for the Trump administration is a problem. The ANC is a problem for the Trump administration. We've got a new government in South Africa since last year. It's a government of national unity. It's not an ANC government. It's a multi-party government. This offers an opportunity to bring non-ANC members to negotiate on behalf of South Africa, even to be appointed an ambassador and so on. So I think that is absolutely important. And I think that South Africans must also understand that sovereignty in the modern world, in the present world, is based on the size of a country's economy. Our economy has declined since 1994. Our economy now is almost the same size, a little bit more than Nigeria's economy. I mean, we can't play anymore. Sovereignty is the last thing we have to think about here. We have to think here about South African jobs, 800,000 or more jobs that we have to think about. And then we have to strategize.
Okay. Yeah, Prof, thank you for those remarks. They are, they are contentious issues because the issues are multi-layered. And whilst those factors that you've cited are important, I mean, there's also issues on policy where we've clashed. But I wonder, Dr. Pheko, if you could also then, weigh in on the back of the accusations and the false narratives, the misinformation that's also been pushed by the United States, President Donald Trump, just in relation to land confiscation, white genocide, race, etc. I mean, that's exacerbating the situation as well. And they're not an innocent party in it.
They're not an innocent party. I think that it is also linked to the extent to which South Africa is able to put our own best foot forward in the context of the narrative that we create. We're not very good with our own narrative creation. When we do have institutions like Brand South Africa that are actually supposed to be the countervailing energy and the countervailing force behind this, we are not supposed to be really dealing with this the unfettered misinformation that other countries, and in this instance, the United States, feels at liberty to foment around us. And we've been here before, and we know that that kind of misenergy, that kind of misinformation. Remember the Ball Pottinger narrative, which created a whole national crisis and even an international crisis. We shouldn't take this lightly. And many countries do this very well. I mean, countries like, Rwanda, countries like South Sudan, for that matter, who are able, in the midst of very difficult and sometimes far more complex circumstances than ourselves, to do a lot of important work across capital cities globally and invest in this. Call the press conferences, do the aggressive trade shows, do the aggressive road shows across the world, and speak to different entities. I think I would have had the opportunity, for example, to speak to the Congressional Black Caucus, to speak to academia across the US, to go on road shows rather than defending and trying to convince people who don't really want to be convinced, who are sold into this false narrative for political mischief, perhaps, that we are not racist, that we're not bad people, that bad things are not happening. And we really need to be much more clear about that. But we also need to remember that this also links into things like the medium-term expenditure framework. It links to things like the NDP. It links to the governance and accountability frameworks that we have put in place to ourselves. And these are the things that we need to be putting forward. Remember that we also have our 7 apex priorities that are guiding the work of the 6th administration. And these speak to economic transformation, strengthening governance, fighting corruption, and yes, land restitution, which is not a new priority. It's a constitution. This is stated in the Constitution that every government, including the United States, has had access to since 1994. So I think that this defensive posture is not doing us any favors, particularly because the posture of the United States is aggressive, is not necessarily always in good faith. And I think no matter what we say or do, there seems to be a commitment to creating this narrative of bad faith on the part of South Africa. I don't
Okay.
think that somebody like President Trump is somebody that we should be kowtowing to per se.
Okay, so being intentional about being at the fore of crafting our narrative, and perhaps also because of the timing of all of this, Prof. Gumede, I mean, we've also seen the appointment of, SABC Jonas now as a special envoy to advance South Africa's strategic partnership with the United States. It's been met with some harsh criticism. Perhaps you could also weigh in there. Do you think other names should have been considered from outside of the ANC? Some also questioning whether, someone who is in parliament should have topped that list. What are you observing?
The US may be exaggerating, some of the issues in South Africa, but South Africa we are entirely to blame also, and we have to accept that. We have to be grown-ups, we have to be mature, and I accept that. For example, expropriation, the act, I was the head of the government review of state-owned lands and property between 2017 and 2018. The government accepted our report. Most of our land in the country is owned by the state, and then second by communal land. Our recommendation was give state land to the poor and give title deeds of community lands, to ordinary families. That will solve our land transformation problem. Now, our law, unfortunately, the expropriation law, property in a modern economy is not just about land for Afrikaners. Property is pension funds, it is shareholding, property is businesses. So the US, and not only the US, but other countries and locally, people are worried about the expropriation act because it means with that act, somebody's pension can be taken. So a US investor in South Africa, if they are institutional investors in our business, that can be taken. So we need to do a couple of things to engage with the US. First thing is we have to review the Expropriation Act because it does not make sense. If we want to transform our society and we want to redistribute the land, give the state land and give communal land to individuals, give them a property right and deal with incompetence in the state and deal with corruption. Now, how do we engage? I would say, and I have also counseled, the political parties, put an envoy there that is not linked to the government, potentially, and not linked to the ANC. There are many, many South Africans who are great patriots. For example, a person like Gary Player, who is not a politician, he possibly doesn't know politics, but he is very close to the Trump administration.
Okay, Prof.
Why not approach a person like that? There is Leon from the DA that could also be appointed.
Okay, Prof, thank you for speaking to some of those examples. I just want to quickly turn our attention now back to domestic issues. Dr. Pheko, we obviously just seeing, we're looking at National Treasury now reportedly scrambling to reverse that 0.5% point VAT increase. It's scheduled to kick in on the 1st of May. I mean, we're looking at the implications, and we're wondering whether, the VAT is likely to be scrapped before it kicks in. Retailers also scrambling on the back of, zero-rated food items. Tell us a little bit more about that precarious situation we find ourselves in.
So the implications of the VAT hike, I mean, there are different schools of thought. The one is that, of course, there'll be lost revenue if it's abandoned. I think that the Treasury has projected that, I think the 0.5% rise that's scheduled for the 1st of May yield about 30.5 billion to the fiscus, and that this is also going to create pressure on the budget if it's not, if this increase doesn't take place, inflationary impact and so on. But then the solution is bridge this revenue gap without the VAT increase, which would be a much more popular proposition. And this means lifting the SARS budgeted collections by about 20 billion rands, between 20 and 40 billion rands, which would cover this shortfall. It also means rebating over collections, because we do actually have a very vigorous SARS administration. And this means that rebates to businesses and consumers who pay more than 15% rate. And this is also allowing for adjusted collection targets. And the third piece is this legislative reversal. So following this act of parliament, which to formally reverse the VAT hike, Minister Ngodwana has then stressed that only a parliamentary action can amend this tax rate. But it also means that if we don't deal with this 50% this increase, the disproportionate burden on lower income households, and we should never lose sight of that, because that's the majority of people in this country, especially African people. And VAT is regressive. Even though everybody pays the same rate, low income households pay proportionally more. We need to think about worsening cost of living pressures. We also need to think about the political fallout and the coalition fallout, and the disrupt government spending priorities, because we've seen over the last few years that oftentimes our taxes don't seem to be going where we would like them to go. So, there's a timeline for this, which would be between the 1st of May to early July 2025.
Dr. Pheko,
to begin this. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to you both for joining us. So obviously questions about whether there's going to be rebates for customers and consumers, given, the decision. We're obviously monitoring those developments. It seems like there's still more questions and answers at this point, but thank you to the both of you for weighing in this morning. Professor William Gumede, Professor of Practice, School of Governance at the University of Witwatersrand and founder of Democracy Works Foundation, as well as Dr. Lebohang Pheko, Senior Research Fellow at the Trade Collective.